Hi everyone, welcome back to my channel. I'm Huck. Today I am talking about my worst books or least favorite books of 2019. So in 2019, I didn't feel like there were a lot of books that I didn't love, but I didn't feel like there were a ton of books that I absolutely hated or were just, I was like, these are the worst. So I decided to create 4 categories for this video. So they are most forgettable, worst reading experience, most disappointing, and then most hated books, because I do have a couple that are in that category. And for most of these, I'm probably not going to go super in depth about why I disliked these books, partially because since they were ones I didn't really like, I tried to kind of put them from my mind, but also, you know, I want to make this video and talk about the books that I didn't like, but I also don't really want to dwell on it too long. So I'm not going to go super in depth with these. So the first category that I want to talk about is most forgettable, and this is going to be the one that probably has the least information in it, because these are the books that I have forgotten. Like, I forgot that I even read them this year until I was looking through my Goodreads, until I was going back through my Goodreads of the year to kind of remind myself of the books that I had read. Like, these are the ones I just totally forgot, so I don't have a lot to say about them. So the first one is Soulless by Gail Carriger. This is kind of like a historical fiction set in, I think, Victorian London, and there are like werewolves and vampires. I just remember like feeling like the main character was really frustrating because she was very much like, I'm not like other girls because I'm smart. I really didn't like the romance in it. I thought the writing was cheesy. That's pretty much all I remember about this book. The next book is The Waking Land by Callie Bates, and this one, I really just remember, I think there was like a revolution and our main character has some connection to the earth and has like earth magic or something like that. And this one, like, it was fine, but there wasn't anything especially interesting about it, and it was just so completely forgettable. I really don't remember anything about it. And the last one for this category is The Wicked Deep by Shay Earnshaw, which I remember the best out of all 3 of these because it's the most recent one that I read. But it takes place in like the Pacific Northwest, following this town called Sparrow, where like hundreds of years ago, there were these 3 women who were accused of witchcraft and were drowned in the harbor. And then their spirits now every summer, their spirits come back and possess the bodies of 3 girls and use those bodies to lure boys from the town to their deaths in the harbor. And I just remember not being especially invested in any of the characters. I thought they made a lot of kind of ridiculous decisions. I don't know, they're just like, there wasn't a lot to the story or the characters, and so I forgot that I read this book. So next we're on to the category of worst reading experience. So these are ones that are not necessarily terrible books, or they're ones that, like, I could understand why other people would like them maybe, but it was just such an extremely unpleasant experience to read these books that I just have this kind of like bitter association with them. So the first one that I'm going to talk about is Mind of My Mind by Octavia Butler. So this is the first or second book in her Pattern Master series. This is the first book of the original series, and then there's a prequel. There is this like alien life form that has been breeding humans together for like thousands of years to create this kind of like master race with telepathic abilities. I mean, from what I've read from Octavia Butler's books, all of her books are very like harrowing, you know? They're really tough to read, but this one, I just wanted to like avoid reading it because I just disliked the experience so much. I didn't like any of the characters in it, and I think that one of the things that really bothered me about it was, okay, there were a few things. One I remember is that this alien, the level of control he has over people's lives is just so extreme that it just made it feel like no one had agency, and it was all everyone was just so completely helpless against him, which was just very unpleasant to read about. And then the other thing I think that was the most frustrating about it was this feeling of inevitability. Everything in this just felt like it was completely inevitable, like it couldn't have gone any other way. Whether it was something that was going in a direction you wanted it to, or if it was like something really bad happening going in a direction you did not want it to, it just had this like heavy feeling of inevitability that reading this whole book just made me feel like I had this like weight on my chest, and I did not enjoy this experience at all. And the other book that I have in this category is Muse of Nightmares by Laini Taylor. This is the second book in the Strange the Dreamer duology, and I just read this in December. And this is another one that was just such an unpleasant reading experience in a very different way from Mind of My Mind. But it's another one that like, I could see how other people would like this, so I don't necessarily think that it's like a bad book, but I hated reading this. The main, like, I don't want to say villain, but like antagonist in it, I just hate so much, which to some extent I feel like means that she was written well, because that means that she elicited like a really intense emotional response. And this is another one that I just had this like feeling in my chest that felt different from the other book, but also just like, I can't explain why I hate this character so much, but it's just like this visceral feeling that made it so unpleasant to read this book, and also made me want to avoid reading it because I didn't want to read about her. I just hated her so much. And then I also was really frustrated and angry with some of the main characters in this book, so I didn't even have them to like latch onto and be excited about. And I also just felt like the story didn't focus on the things that I cared about, and it focused a lot more on the stuff that I didn't care as much about, and it was just so frustrating. Now we're going to go into most disappointing. So these are going to be the books that I was really excited about for whatever reason. I had high expectations. They didn't meet those expectations. Again, a lot of these, I don't necessarily think they're terrible books, but they really aren't for me, and they really didn't meet the expectation and the excitement that I had for them. I'm going to start with An Enchantment of Ravens by Margaret Rogerson. This is a standalone YA fantasy that takes place in the fairy world. Our main character is a painter, and she's an incredible painter, so she's hired to paint the portrait of like a fairy prince or fairy king or something like that. And then she paints human emotion into his eyes, which throws him into like a rage, and he pretty much like kidnaps her and brings her to the fairy world because somehow that will avenge his honor. It didn't really make sense. And that was one of my first problems with this, is just that I felt like the premise of this book didn't really make sense, and and things weren't explained enough. Like the world, the magic, the fairy laws or whatever were not explained enough, so I didn't really understand the basic premise of this. Like, why was what she did so offensive? Why did he need to kidnap her? I also didn't like the romance in it. I thought it was just really poorly and shallowly done. But the thing that I was most disappointed by probably was the writing, because I had heard people talk about how beautiful and atmospheric this was, and how it's like very like naturey, foresty, atmosphere, which I was super excited about. And I was like, I could be okay with a mediocre plot if it had like really good writing and atmosphere. It did not. I did not like the writing. The writing, I think, was very inconsistent. There were a few places where it was like nice, and it did have some beautiful description, but most of the time it was like really not that great. And then there were also some points where it was just like really awkwardly written. Like there were some really weird, awkward scenes that were not supposed to be awkward. And because I didn't really like the writing, I didn't feel like the atmosphere was especially well executed. And those are really the things that I had most been looking forward to and really was disappointed by. And my other most disappointing read of the year was The Shadow of the Wind by Carlos Ruiz Zafón. And this one I originally got because it is a book about books, and I was specifically looking for books about books. Also, people said that it was beautifully written, which just made me really excited about it. This is historical fiction that takes place in Barcelona in the 1940s, and we're following this boy whose father brings him to the cemetery of forgotten books. He's allowed to pick one book from this library to read. He finds one called The Shadow of the Wind, which he becomes obsessed with, and he wants to find more books by this author when he finds out that there's this mystery surrounding the author and kind of what happened to him because he sort of disappeared. And then he also finds out that there's this mysterious person who is systematically like hunting down and destroying all of the books by this author. So that kind of starts off the mystery of what happened to the author, and then also who is this guy who is destroying all of his books. And this one, I did think that it was well written. There were definitely parts where I was like really enjoying the writing of it, but there were so many things about the plot that I really didn't like. I mean, I never got really invested in any of the characters, but also really I didn't think that the mystery element was handled very well. Like, there were plot twists that you were waiting to like be revealed at the end, which I had predicted from like the very beginning of the book. But also, it just ends with an info dump. Like, it's a mystery, and so you would want them to like kind of slowly uncover what happened. But for the most part, it felt like they were just kind of running around, not accomplishing much, until at the end they found somebody who could just info dump all of the information to just explain to them what this whole mystery was. Like, just explains everything to them instead of them like actually discovering it for themselves. And I just thought that was such a terrible ending to this story. Also, something else I didn't like about this, like a trope that this has that I really dislike, is that it has incest as a plot twist. And I just hate it when books do that. And now we're finally at my most hated books of the year, or my least favorite books of the year. That's like a nicer way to say it. But the first one that I'm going to talk about is Jonathan Strange and Mr. Norrell by Susanna Clarke, which has dust on it because I have not looked at this book since I read it months ago. So this is historical fantasy that takes place in England in 1806. And in this world, magic has kind of disappeared, but everyone knows that it used to exist, and there is a magician who is trying to bring back magic. And then we end up following these two magicians who are both trying to like learn more about magic, and they kind of have different perspectives on how magic should be learned and used, and then they kind of become obsessed with each other, or like one of them becomes obsessed with the other one. And I don't know, this book was just so boring. I think there were so many things about this book that like could have been cool, but it just wasn't. The way that it's written just was not engaging to me. I didn't care about either of these main characters. I felt like they were only dislikable, but not in a way that was compelling or intriguing or that you could like connect with or sympathize with or anything. They were just annoying, and I didn't care about either of them. And for a book that is about like bringing back magic and following two rival magicians, like there's so little magic. There's almost no magic in it. They even have like fairies in it, and the fairies barely even do any magic. And also, the plot, nothing happens. Like, almost nothing happens in this book. And it's huge. It's like, this is like almost 800 pages or something like that. It's a very chunky book. And nothing happens in it. Also, though, I do remember really disliking the way that female characters were treated in this book, and the way that the like one character of color was treated as well. I think they were both treated very badly. And like, not just that they were treated badly in the book, they were treated badly by the author. Reading it also just feels so pointless. Like, yeah, that's probably, like, this whole book just felt so pointless. There's like dog hair flying everywhere because this was like sitting on my floor for months. Oh my god. So we are now at my least favorite of all of the books of 2019, which is The Girl in the Tower by Katherine Arden, and also The Bear and the Nightingale. I actually read both of these this year. I totally forgot that I reread this at the beginning of the year to like prep myself for reading this, and I hated them both. And I know that this is a really popular series on BookTube that a lot of people really love, but I just cannot stand these books, these characters. The main character in this, Vasya, is that her name? Vasilisa? She's just one of the like most frustrating characters that I've ever read about. Like, she just makes me angry. She's like a cardboard cutout of a character who, like, we're told these really shallow facts about her, and those are supposed to create a character, but like she doesn't actually have a personality or a character to her. And she's just like obstinate in a way that is so frustrating and just stupid. Like, she's a character that she's like headstrong and obstinate to the point of stupidity, and she's supposed to be like this strong, independent female character, but I really feel like she's a very shallow interpretation of what it means to be a strong female character, and she's just so annoying and I dislike her so much. And like, I don't understand why everybody is so obsessed with her. This is also one of those situations where it's like, she's a terrible character, and yet everyone in the story is obsessed with her, and it makes no sense. It's so frustrating. I don't know if I can just like impress upon you how annoyed I was with her as a character. And I really hate the romance in this. It has a romance trope that I just cannot stand. And actually, when I talked about this in my wrap-up, I was saying that I was going to do a video specifically talking about the trope that's in this that I dislike because it takes some explanation, and I'm still going to do that. I've had a lot of other things that I was working on, but that's still gonna happen. But this is one that I feel like I cannot coherently explain to you why it is on this list at the top spot of least favorites of the entire year. But I will link below my wrap-up where I talked about this, where I think I have a bit more explanation of what I didn't like about it. Actually, I'll link below all of the wrap-up videos or other relevant videos where I talked about any of these books, where I talked more in depth, or I just had more relevant information because I read them more recently. So those will all be in the description if you want more information about them. Alright, so those are all of my worst books of 2019, all the way from just most forgettable to my least favorite that made me the most angry. Thank you all for watching, and until next time, bye!